what I'm going to talk about today will resonate really quite a lot with the audience here today. So I won't introduce too much about myself other than to say the role is actually almost about a transformation in terms of what connectivity can bring by building it within our vehicles. And it's actually something that has taken the organization a while. I kind of fought to get things going. And now it's a case of a lot of pushing. And now it's being kind of dragged for not going quick enough. So I think it's a familiar story when you're trying to do any kind of innovation. So I'm going to set the scene a little bit, just in terms of connected car. I'm then going to talk about our in-control offerings, which are some of our consumer-facing technologies. And that's really to give you a bit of an idea and appreciation of the kind of technologies I'm talking about. I won't linger too long. The easiest thing is just to go out there and buy some of our cars, and that will be a lot quicker than me running through PowerPoints. And then, actually, I'll talk a little bit about the opportunities and the challenges, because actually, I think there's some great stuff actually we can do. But I think right now there's some tensions and there's some stuff really that needs to be worked through. Okay, without further ado, so let's just think really from the context that we're trying to operate in the world. And I think, the other speakers are reiterating many of the things I'm going to kind of talk about today. So everything being connected, every day there's a new statistic. It's like, there's more mobile phones than there are cells in the world, and, ridiculous statistics. But what we also realize is that not only is everyone connected with multiple devices, but actually everything is being connected. My boilers can be connected from my mobile phone. Actually, a lot of my house can actually be connected, but you kind of expect that. The fact is, actually, technology is being used for consumer-facing items by using built-in connectivity, but actually also from an operational intelligence, what the Germans tend to refer to as Industry 4.0, that actually everything from manufacturing and design processes is across multiple industries also being heavily digitized, and built-in connectivity is at the heart of that. Obviously, megacities is both an opportunity and a challenge for us. Obviously, clearly, many of our customers sit in these megacities, but we also know by the numbers of people, this will create disruption in terms of levels of traffic and people's desire to actually sit in a vehicle. And I think, obviously, the typical kind of Uber and disruptive technologies around mobility services is something that is probably linked very heavily to megacities. That I think, the point has been made, for many people living in a large city, actually it's extremely difficult to actually own a car because I can't find anywhere to park it and these kind of things. And these are challenges that right now the mobility service market is actually very small. It gets good headlines, but it's very small. But you kind of know that as the situation within cities becomes more difficult, actually, more and more people will find it too much of a hassle. And that's something, especially as an auto OEM, we have to think very carefully about and how we operate with that. Increased complexity. Jaguar Land Rover sells to over 170 countries, meeting the various privacy requirements, monitoring requirements that various governments has, and the various legal and regulatory requirements that we have. We'll touch on those things like the EU wanting emergency call, which will mean every vehicle from 2018 onwards will in effect have to have an e-call facility, which means in effect every car from that point will have a SIM card in it. It'll have the guts of a mobile phone, and it will communicate in the event of a crash. So whether we like it or not, this is going to happen. Connectivity will go into cars. Now, we see a value in it, and we also see a customer feature benefit, which is why we've adopted these things and doing it. We're not waiting for regulation. Clearly, we'll comply, but we're not waiting for regulation. And the last thing is security. You can probably imagine with the headlines over the last probably 6 months, the number of times that I get asked and called into meetings to explain myself as to what potential risks are. This is an ongoing and difficult war of attrition. That's probably the only way to describe it. We spend an awful lot of money to actually try and ensure that on a constant basis we keep our vehicles secure. That's something one has to engineer in from day one. You can't put sticking plasters out here over the top and expect that you're going to run a secure service. And I think the headlines have demonstrated this time and time again. For us, this is not, by the way, a customer view. This is a very technology view, so I apologize. This is the kind of technologies that we at Jaguar Land Rover mean by connected car. So infotainment, so in our case, that's a touch screen, the various other touch points within our vehicle. So very much around the driver. Telematics, most of you are kind of aware of that. That's really the black box. That's with the SIM in it. That's communicating, integrated in our case with our vehicle. Connected devices, because for us, no matter what we build in, we know that our customers will bring in the latest technology. Where you have a product life cycle of 4 years for a vehicle, whereas Apple are going to churn out a new iPhone every, say, 9 months. Android maybe 7 months. So the product cycles between consumer electronics and automotive is a massive challenge. It's a headache. But our customers, if we don't support those, that £600 device may be the reason someone doesn't buy a Range Rover. It's as simple as that. And really, people feel the desire to have a mobile phone, no matter what they think about that car. If that doesn't work, they'll switch brands, they'll switch cars. And the last area is something that we're working from a research point of view, which is V2X. So this is around vehicle-to-vehicle communication, not in the way that we use a typical mobile network, but this is peer communication. So, for example, I slam on the brakes, do an emergency stop, it actually will broadcast a signal to vehicles nearby to let them know. It's not reliant on Vodafone, O2, or anyone else. Okay, so it's a completely broadcast peer-based network that actually allows vehicles to communicate with one another to let them know of events that are happening. And the X is because you can also talk to infrastructure. So, for example, roadworks could have beacons in them to let your car know in advance that a lane is closed, for example. So those are the kind of 4 technologies. You'll never see us listing these kind of words out from a consumer offering, but it helps maybe a perspective of what my job involves. And really, we think about all of this from really 2 ends of the spectrum. First is actually the customer experience. So how can we enhance it? And at the other extreme, the enhancing the driving experience. What's really important, and I think depending on which room you're in, we have to very much focus on driver safety. So one of the things about all of this stuff is, you can actually put loads and loads of stuff into cars and loads of tech, but actually this could be distracting. So we have to very carefully balance what technology we actually make available to you when you're driving to ensure that people aren't distracted, because clearly that would have a negative effect. And that's why we are also investing heavily in much better voice quality for voice recognition. So you can speak to your car more in a natural voice rather than the typical kind of robotic systems that have been the case for a number of years. And to be fair, most of those systems, most people try them a few times and give up. So we're really looking around natural voice as a way of communicating to make sure that you can keep your hands on the wheel. So this is another important point, and it's an important point because when I'm talking to my engineering colleagues, they only ever think about the vehicle itself. But actually, connected car, our touch points in terms of what we're delivering sit both inside the car. So, we'd have our touch screen, we have our cluster, we use a digital, that's behind the steering wheel, and you'll see some images of that. We have the devices, rear seat entertainment, And we have things like roadside assistance, emergency call buttons up in the console, overhead console. Outside of the vehicle, and you'll see some of the screens I'll show you, we can also interact with people's apps, iPads, web portals, and we give the ability to use companion apps outside of the vehicle to do things to the vehicle. And also we enable dealers and our sales companies to provide them with management information and set up processes via that. So all of this is actually, and this is only current. This is the actual environment that the connected car operates in, and that's very much at the moment really probably thinking more consumer focused. And given the audience today, I'll talk about how I see that evolving and what else can be done. To give you a bit of a sort of sheep dip, as it were, in terms of what we're doing in my recent cars. So this is a little bit of our new infotainment system. I'm not going to go through it slavishly, but I just want to give you a flavor of how things have moved on and how quickly technology moves on. So this is available in the new Jaguar XF, XJ, and F-Pace, and rolling across all of our vehicles. So the first thing you notice that we're moving to much higher quality. The screens are what you'd expect within from a typical tablet. You can pinch and zoom. Their processing speed is extremely fast. So we're putting in, for those that understand this, we're putting in like quad-core processors. So this is really quite a lot of computing power now we're sticking into our cars to make the experience good. Because I think we can all admit that actually in-car experiences from all manufacturers, without pointing any fingers whatsoever, have never been great. And this is something we have to improve. And again, the experience is very much like you'd kind of expect to see on your iPad or other tablet. I'm not sponsored by Apple. I think a really important part of it, and a number of people have talked about mobility. And actually, generally speaking, the car is only one part of an experience. So my journey today, here's a good example. So I drove to the station, I then got the train, I then got the tube. So again, you have a multimodal journey in terms of actually getting from A to B. So as part of this, in the past, the way that most people thought about navigation was you get in it and you set a destination. Now we provide companion apps, so you can set destinations, you can have favorites, you can do a lot of the work, even the setup of setting up all your favorite places outside of the house, outside of the car, and then knowing that is automatically pushed to the vehicle. So this means the vehicle's already anticipating, and when you reach your kind of destination as far as the car's concerned, it'll hand back to your companion app. So we're also integrating with other mass forms of transit to enable you to kind of see, and that means inside the vehicle you can even see, for example, and we'll see a screenshot of it, like flight trackers. So not timetables, that's of no interest to anyone. It's actually what's happening right now. And therefore, as my car's approaching somewhere, I can actually, and when I've got another leg of a journey, I can get information as I'm coming up, which makes me decide whether I need to run, if the train's, which is usually me. If the train's running 5 minutes late, I can kind of, and I can, without even making any effort whatsoever, I know it is, and I can walk casually to the train station. This, unfortunately, is not, that's not the normal situation for me. So this is kind of the other thing I said about kind of keeping hands on the wheel. So again, we bring navigation. You're able to move your navigation views right up in front of you. So again, your kind of eyes glancing down rather than glancing across. And that's the digital quality of this means that we can really enhance the experience when you are driving and navigating. The companion apps I mentioned here. So we support Android and Apple and any kind of web device as well. So some of those, I know working in financial services, I see quite a few Blackberries around the room. We don't support those. I won't make any comment. So it's just something that really makes the experience a lot easier for people, and I think people can do this then with a few clicks and actually set their destination. And This will also bring in live traffic information as well, and that's live traffic information that you can also see in the car. And that's something, by having built-in connectivity, you've actually got really high definition traffic, and the traffic that you're used to, without naming those very large US suppliers that people get maps from, that's the expectation now from the consumer, and we have to mimic that in terms of actually real live traffic. Now here's some kind of images that we show from some of our services that we also make available in the car. And we're trying to think driver-centric as well. And one of those there is actually a flight tracker. And you'd be like, I can do that from an app. Why do I want that? So the idea actually is really simple. I don't put the address as like Terminal 5 or something like that. I just put in my flight number. So straight away it goes and gets the details of the flight, works out which airport it's at, and tells me the current status of it. And then what it will do is, in the background, it will check the status of that. So actually, I've done it, I do it once, I never need to go and look at it, but if anything changes to that flight while I'm driving down to Heathrow, I can get an alert to tell me the plane's been cancelled, or the plane's running late, or something has happened. So again, we're trying to think driver-centric, stopping that customer pulling out their phone and fiddling or making unnecessary calls, and again, distracting, to try and actually think driver-centric. As well as our infotainment, the in-control suite includes a number of other connected car technologies. So I showed a few screens from our pro services there. We have our in-control apps, which enables smartphones to be used to put content onto our touchscreen and interact with them in a more driver-safe way. Our Protect is a suite that's basically a set of telematics-oriented services. So emergency call, optimized roadside assistance, where we're passing diagnostic data to our roadside provider, and the app, which you'll see a few screenshots of. We also, given the nature of kind of SUVs, we also include now in-control secure, which is a stolen vehicle tracking, and in the UK we certify that with Thatcham to help people with total cost of ownership in making sure they got recognition for the fact that there's a built-in tracker within their vehicles. And now this is actually being on certain UK vehicles, we're now actually including this as standard. We also offer Wi-Fi hotspot, so the infotainment system I just showed before, the Wi-Fi hotspot's built in. On the midline kind of system, it's an option that you can have onto the vehicle as well. So this will support up to 7 devices within the vehicle. So, and I won't apologize for the gratuitous use of images of our vehicles as well. It's my attempt at some liminal sales here. The telematics kind of side of things means we can also put in people's hands a kind of an app to allow them to get information. Certain of it's read-only, my current mileage, the location of where my vehicle's parked and things like that. But of course, because we've integrated our telematics unit into our car, can turn on the heater so we can actually start the engine remotely, turn climate on, lock and unlock locking the doors, etc. So even turn off the alarm. So in those cases where a big HGV goes past your car and your neighbour rings you up to tell you your car alarm's going, which sometimes happens, you can actually remotely turning off. So again, we're trying to put that convenience. We've not quite launched our drive from a smartphone yet, sort of James Bond style, but that's certainly been done by our research department. I mentioned connected devices, and clearly this is something that our customers spend an awful lot of time with. So it's something that we need to make sure that we support. But we don't want to enable our customers to be playing Angry Birds while driving. That probably wouldn't be very safe, and from a corporate point of view would not reflect well on us. So we control what apps we allow to be used, but basically this is a technology where the processing is actually done on the phone. So we kind of plug your phone in, like that, And then within this is within an F-type, you're able to actually get the apps up running on the screen. And again, they are limited by certain types, so we tend to look for music players and things like that. So things that are driver safe. We also, the app developers, we don't develop those apps, most of them. These are kind of third parties. But what they're doing there is actually simplifying the user interface. So they will kind of put the user interface in a landscape mode and simplify it. Because when you're sort of task-based, there's lots of things you might want to do. But actually, when you're driving, you probably want a few simple functions. And you want the buttons to be big as well, so you can just reach and not have to kind of miss and end up being distracted as well. Clearly, there's technologies that some people may have heard of, like Apple CarPlay and Google Auto. We will also integrate those within our vehicle. They're not in our current ones, but we will integrate those as well. We see that as part of our customers' desire to use those technologies, and we will also adopt those technologies too. Okay, I'm hoping, I know I went very quickly, but I'm hoping that that has given you a bit of a flavor of the type of technologies and how quick this is kind of moving in terms of certainly what Jaguar Land Rover is doing around the connected car. So now let's put it more in the case of the audience here today. And I think I'm clearly not from a fleet or a finance or leasing background, but this is just a very simple diagram that I kind of drew out for myself to sort of understand the whole life cost and the operating model. And then it's like, okay, what could connected car do? Now, clearly, connected car in reality can't change any of this stuff, right? If you look at those kind of inputs in terms of the whole life cost, they're not something that having connectivity can actually change. But what you can do is you can optimize. So depreciation, I can, using data, understand more about the current state of the vehicle and potentially the odometer reading of that vehicle and where it is against a finance plan, for example. Service maintenance, we know when the car needs a service now. We know the current state. We are pushing some data. We don't. It has been said that the OEMs kind of push huge amounts of data. The honest answer is we don't. There's a couple of reasons for them. One is privacy, which we'll come onto in more detail. Second one's actually realistically cost. Because actually, if we're pushing this data, if there's no reason for us to do so, it's actually not that cheap, irrespective of the mobile operators that may be in this room. And thirdly, actually, coverage is not pervasive, certainly in the UK. So cars go in many areas that are not population-centric, and I think we all know we've plenty of places where there are dead zones. So actually, we don't want to try and rely on pushing data all of the time. It's expensive. It doesn't always work to push large volumes. So we're quite conservative. The art of the possible is much bigger, but it's also scary for some people, and we need to be very mindful of that in terms of our customers. And the other thing is running costs. So clearly, the way that you drive will affect, so how hard you accelerate and brake clearly affects things. So that kind of started to think about, okay, so there's areas where actually we could inform, which means we could better manage. And I said, I'm talking about everyone in this room, not necessarily us. Some of these tasks are not done by an OEM. So then, if we drill into that a little bit and think about duty of care. So actually, we have the ability to make an emergency call, and therefore to the emergency services, giving the location of the vehicle, not personal information, just the location of the vehicle, its color, its fuel type, few bits of data to enable them to get to you quickly. And this is there's been quite a few cases in the news where people have been found dead days later, and I think this is something where the ability to actually send that data, get the emergency services out to you, is actually quite an important part from a duty of care, from a fleet perspective. Driver behavior, obviously the way that you drive, not only does it affect fuel consumption as cost, but obviously the risk that the driver and thus the asset itself in terms of what you may do to it. And the other thing is we also have kind of alerts. So I mentioned service, and that's a good one, where actually someone may be driving around, the car's telling them it needs something, it needs a service or it needs something. Now, the fact is there's nothing to stop someone driving around and ignoring all that stuff. And again, this is where, from a fleet perspective, this is actually, quite useful information as well. Employee benefits, route optimization, we talked about, so saving fuel and also getting there as quickly as possible. Expense reporting from our app and portals, you can, for all your journeys, if you turn journey logging on, it will give you all your journeys, the efficiency of those journeys, and you can export that out to Excel. So we find actually business customers kind of like that, because I don't need to worry about doing, figuring out, going to Google or something and figuring out where I went to and how many miles was it. I can actually just download and then select which ones were the business ones for expenses purposes. Again, corporate social responsibility, the way that someone's driving, we do push that, and we'll be pushing it. We're trialing it internally in terms of showing people how they're driving to get some feedback. Clearly, this is something we could easily integrate. We're just seeing our own reaction in terms of the fleets that we run with our own company. Residual value, I think the odometer reading is kind of gives you a place of where you are, but actually the interesting thing is with connected car and with some of our new services, you can actually be able to buy things that you can put onto the car, and these are software enabled. So in effect, you've got, typically a vehicle, you buy it and nothing really changes over the lifetime of that vehicle in terms of what that vehicle has on it. We're able to actually, via software, enable new features on the vehicle. And this is something you'll see over the air. This is something you'll see other manufacturers do as well. So suddenly what the vehicle can do differs from when I went into configurator, selected a bunch of options, and then went through a payment, however that was actually transacted. And lastly, cost control. And I think, stolen vehicle tracking, insurance, telematics, accident management, etc. There's a whole bunch of areas where we actually can have data that can support many of the kind of tasks that are around both the fleet and the leasing business. Now, my personal view is actually we can probably provide more data than actually many of you in this room can actually use, because of your existing systems, because actually not all manufacturers do this. So there is that kind of, actually, not everyone's there yet. So that's really interesting, which is the comments that have come to me before, really interested in this. But until all of the car manufacturers do it, then, it's just interesting right now to us. Now, I think this is something where this will happen faster than you think. One, virtually every OEM is launching, even the volume manufacturers are launching built-in telematics into their cars. So even if they don't have them today, they will have them. So very quickly, that opportunity will come there. There aren't standards and things like that, but there is a way of working. There is a way of achieving exchanges. And I think I just wanted to give a flavor of what I think of some of the opportunities might be. Clearly, everything from stop checking, actually in a big park where vehicles may be stored, you can actually track all the vehicles, so you know exactly where they are and how many there are. We actually use data before the vehicles actually handed over to the customer. So we're using that in the logistics train, so we actually push the battery status and things like that. So we know as it's been moved on and off loaders to the dealer, we know what's actually happening to it. Again, vehicle status information like that can be supplied. Real usage versus a financial model. So that 12,000 mile PCP versus the 25,000 they actually do after 3 years is the type of, those are the kind of things that actually data can inform those. Predictive asset management. For my sins, I worked in utilities before automotive. A lot of that was around asset management, and there's some interesting parallels in terms of thinking about the vehicle as an asset and managing it like an asset, like other asset-based industries do. Clearly, crash notification and ethanol claims management, these are real opportunities. UBI, or usage-based insurance, is a very niche thing, I think. Right now in the UK, only 2.7% of all insurance policies are telematics. Usage-based appeals to a certain small segment and a high-risk segment that have got no other way of being insured. I think there is more that can be done in the insurance market, is my personal belief, but that requires a bit more imagination from the insurance industry. In-car applications, we have the ability to actually deliver things. We can work in partnership with different countries. We're not going to open it up, I'll be honest, for everyone to just do that. We are concerned about safety, driver distraction, etc. But we will work with companies in terms of that. Okay, so challenges in terms of privacy. I mean, the legislation right now, we have launched services, connected services in 14 markets. In 2 years' time, we'll probably be 95% of our volume will be connected. So that's 95% of cars globally we produce will be connected. The legislation in every country, even in Europe, is an absolute nightmare. It's incredibly complex, and it's an ever-changing field, and we spend a fortune with legal advisors. It's a great little money spinner for them. Really important point, we have taken this from day one. These technologies are opt-in, so it's not you turn it off if you don't like it. We genuinely believe that customers need to opt into these things. This helps us much clearer in terms of privacy and things like that. If a customer doesn't want it, they don't have to have any of these features. That's right now, I would say, very, very small, actually, surprisingly small. I thought it might be more than that. Number of people say no and don't want it for multiple reasons. They just don't want to touch it. But actually, the vast majority of our customers do, and they find it beneficial. And this is the reason being, right? If those features offer value, then they're prepared to share the data. And it's about customer value, right? It's not about technology, it's not about data, it's about, is this useful to me? Then actually I'm prepared to sign up to your privacy policy and exchange data. But that whole landscape is a little tricky, and we'll come on to that. But I think one of the things we've seen is by providing an app into people's hands that they can use, in certain circumstances, we can even see this being used on a daily basis. I mentioned journey logging. That's something we see. We can see people doing their expenses. We'll not see them doing it, but we know they're downloading it. So we know that people are taking that information and using it. So again, suddenly the touch points from a CRM perspective become interesting, because suddenly we have put an app in the hands of customers who have a way of actually talking to us and us talking to them. We're not exploiting that right now, but clearly it is a very, very interesting channel that we can use. And I think this all comes back to, if you've got them there, you've got that you need to create that kind of stickiness. So if there's that value and if the things become useful, then actually the data exchange happens and people don't, just like when you use a well-known search company, you're not paying for it, but you know fully that they're exploiting the data that you're using as part of their business model. Similarly, we're providing features and we get the data back which we can actually use. Now, I have to be extremely clear that we do not go and sell that data to anyone else, okay? We are not there to flog lots of data off. That's not what our customers want. However, if it was to work with another third party, which we already do, for example, like stolen vehicle tracking, there is a data exchange, but the customer is there getting value in terms of a service that we're running. I'm very conscious of time, sorry. So I think, providing data to kind of fleet insurance companies actually is complex. But actually it's just an IT thing. It's IT integration. Everyone has different systems. Everyone uses different data standards. So actually, you know, it's all doable, but just messy. I think from our perspective, though, we see that as ultimately very doable. But actually, this is probably, you know, the area where I think this is a challenge, which is kind of actually, you know, when it's not just me going in, handing over a big wad of cash for the car, then actually those relationships make it a bit more complex. So, you know, who has agreed to the privacy policy that we have to actually provide for data privacy perspectives? You know, is it the person themselves, or the driver, the employee, the vehicle owner? And so it goes on. So this is quite complex. You know, how do we handle multiple users in cars as well? Kind of don't really want to log into the car, but you know, you can suddenly see the need in the future where we need identity to protect the relationship between the data and the person giving access to it. In summary, I think Jaguar Land Rover has made huge strides forward in terms of both our products, their design appeal, and the technology that we put inside them. Right now, we've been very much focused around the features that we can give to our customers. But I think it's very clear, I hope, that actually there's an awful lot more that we can do with many of you in this room. And I think that's the really interesting area for the future. Thank you.